One of the worrying failure of democracy is the representation of women in democratic institutions. When I spoke about democracy, democracy is a form of political organization where every citizen has a reasonably equal opportunity to participate in the governance, to participate in the political process. Unlike the other forms of political organization like monarchy, dictatorship, military rule, in all such forms of political organization, the select elite will only have an opportunity to participate in the governance, in the political process. If it is a monarchy, only the royal family and their closest aides will have the privilege of forming the ruling elite. But in democracy, the governments are formed by universal adult franchise, where people elect their representatives. So they are not nominated. They are not destined to become people's representative. The responsibility to rule the country is not bestowed by inheritance, just because their parents were rulers, though there is politics of inheritance in a very big way in India. But democracy, the true spirit of democracy is ultimately they have to be elected by the people. Even if they belong to popular families, political families, but they can't come to power without getting elected by the people. So therefore, democracy is expected to be a representative form of government. When we say representative form of government, the polity should reasonably reflect the demographic composition of society. Society comprises of several castes and a significant differentiation in the gender. So, in order to ensure proper representation for the marginalized sections of society, the Constitution allows for reservations to scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in Parliament and state assemblies. So there has been a demand from the backward classes that they are not properly represented in the institutions of legislature. The Mandal Commission estimated that the backward classes account for 52% of India's population. But their representation in Parliament, especially the Lok Sabha, Parliament, when we mean Parliament has two houses in India, one upper house Rajya Sabha, two lower house Lok Sabha. This policy of having two houses in political science is called bicameralism. Bicameralism refers to a form of parliamentary democracy or a form of democracy where there are two legislative houses, upper house and the lower house. So in Lok Sabha, backward classes have 120 members out of 543. It is around 22 to 23%. Certainly less than the share in the population. As I told you, as per the Mandal Commission estimates, the share of other backward classes in India, OBCs, is around 52%, 52. There is a demand from several leaders, especially leaders like Nitish Kumar, Tejasvi Yadav, to have a caste census so that the actual estimate of the OBC population will be arrived at. So their argument is that OBCs are underrepresented in every walk of life. So we really do not know what exactly the accurate share of population of OBCs, because after the Mandal Committee also was a rough estimate. There was a caste census in 2011, but Government of India decided not to reveal the data, at least the caste-wise data. Now there is a huge demand to conduct caste census. The argument of the leaders like Nitish Kumar, Lalu Prasad Yadav, etc., is that OBCs are underrepresented in democracy, in Indian democracy. Well, it's a fact. I can't say what is the percentage of underrepresentation, but it is a fact that the OBCs are not equally represented, proportionately represented. So when we use proportionately, the representation is much below their share in population. Well, this is a serious question. Democracy is expected to have reasonably well representation of all the communities. So it's a representative form of government. So politics are different from mathematics. So politics need not necessarily have a proportionate representation unless there is a form of reservations like for SCs and STs. Well, one of the social groups that are grossly underrepresented in Indian parliamentary institutions are women. Surprisingly, women account for much less compared to the share in population. Women account for nearly half of Indian population. States like Kerala have more women than men. But certainly, if you look at the All India aggregates, they're nearly half. But you'll be surprised to know that the present Lok Sabha has the highest representation of women in the history of Indian democracy. The first Lok Sabha has around 24 women members. The present Lok Sabha has around 78 women members. So from 1950s to 2021, 7 decades, from 24 to 78 is certainly a significant increase. But what is the level of percentages? So even today, though we have a record number of 78 women MPs, the women account for only 14.4% of total strength of Lok Sabha. So 14.4% is certainly much less when compared to the women's share in the total population, which is around 50%. And even this 14.4% is in this Lok Sabha. So India took 7 decades to add another 50 MPs. You'll be surprised to know that a bill was introduced in Parliament to reserve 1/3 of Lok Sabha and Assembly seats to women. Way back in 1996, on September 12, 1996, a bill was introduced in Parliament. 25 years later, the bill is not yet adopted, despite majority of the political parties publicly expressing their commitment. They have included this in their election manifestos also. For instance, the Congress, the BJP, the left, the TDP, the YCP, TRS, AIADMK, DMK, host of other political parties are theoretically committed to the concept of providing women 1/3 of seats in Assembly and Parliament. Yet 25 years later, the bill still languishing in Indian politics. Well, the bill was passed by Rajya Sabha in 2010, but it has never seen passage of Lok Sabha. So even after 25 years, this shows how patriarchy has crept into Indian democracy. How the male members of parliament are not ready to give up their electoral opportunities to the women members. Well, that is the reason why we have such a low representation of women in parliament. The situation is much worse in the state level. You'll be surprised to know that the share of women in the total assemblies in India is around 8% only. At least Lok Sabha is relatively better. Well, Rajya Sabha is also around 10%. There are around 25 women members in Rajya Sabha. Let me also give you a comparison with the global situation. According to the data compiled by Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, the global average is around 25.5%. In the world democracies, around little over 25% of the members are women. There is a great variation. Countries like Rwanda has over 61% representation. 61% of women, members of Rwandan parliament are women. Well, we have countries like Cuba, Bolivia, where more than 50% of members are women. You can't expect a country like Afghanistan, which believes that there shouldn't be women at all. Perhaps under the Taliban regime, there will be zero women members of parliament. The Taliban spokesperson officially stated that women have no role in government. So we have in around 4 countries, as per the IPU data, women account for more than 50% of their parliament. In 19 countries, women account for over 40%. But in India, it is only 14.4%, much below the global average of 25.5%. If you rank India among 193 countries in terms of the representation of women in legislatures, the country's rank is around 145 or 147, much worse compared to several nations in the world. So this data, global data, reveals that Indian democracy is still largely unrepresentative, though technically any woman can contest. A woman can win the elections. Nobody stops. There's no discrimination against women as such. There's no rule, there's no provision that bars women from contesting and winning elections. But the reality is they will never cross the present figure of 78. Why is this situation? When we say democracy to be inclusive, when we say democracy to be representative, well, somebody may ask me, sir, how does it matter whether women or men? Well, my question is also the same. How does it matter if women replace men? If it doesn't matter whether men or women, then it also doesn't matter if women replace the men. So that is the first question. Second question is, what do you mean by representative democracy? Representative essentially means various social groups, caste, gender, class, age, they should have an equally fair representation. Then it can't be representative. So representative essentially means that various social divisions, social groups should get due representation. May not be mathematical equality. Nobody says that the woman should be 48.9% or 47.8%. That is the reason the demand has come for 1/3. There is no statistical significance or sanctity associated with the demand for 1/3. But still, why 1/3 has become a demand? Because 1/3 is reasonably nearer to the women's share in population. That is around 50%. And fairly higher than the present level of representation, the 14.4%. That's the reason the demand for 33% has come. Assuming that there are 1/3 women assuming that the Women's Reservation Bill, which was introduced in the Parliament for the first time in 1996, was adopted in 96 or even 2006 or even 2016, there would have been 181 women members in Parliament. Now how much? 78. Look at 103 women members are missing from Parliament. Well, there is also yet another answer to the question, how does it matter whether men or women? Well, the first answer is to make democracy more representative, to make democracy more meaningful. Women who account for half of the population should have a reasonably greater representation. Well, second aspect is, what is development? Development is broadly defined as economic development or social or human development. So economic development is one way of defining development, which includes economic growth, gross domestic product, exports and imports, foreign exchange reserves, inflation. All these indicators construe economic development. But there is yet another concept popularized by United Nations Development Program and economists like Amartya Sen. This concept of development is called social development and human development. I'll tell you more about this in my subsequent lectures when I speak about economy. Well, what do you mean by social development and human development? The indicators include education, health indicators, health outcomes, life expectancy, female-male ratio, child sex ratio, or access to sanitation, access to drinking water, infant mortality, maternal mortality, female literacy. All these are indicators of human development. There is a significant difference. You'll be surprised to know that Punjab and Haryana, which are prosperous states in India, Gujarat and Maharashtra, which are the most industrialized states in India. If you compare these states with the South Indian states, like Kerala especially, or Tamil Nadu, in all these indicators, infant mortality, maternal mortality, female-male ratio, etc., etc., the four states which are mentioned, Punjab, Haryana, Gujarat, and Maharashtra, which are economically powerful states, but they significantly lag behind South Indian states, especially Kerala and Tamil Nadu. Why? If the development essentially mean better human conditions, well, why should more infants die in Gujarat or Maharashtra or Punjab or Haryana? Why should more mothers die? So therefore, the concept of social development and human development are gain currency. A country like Bhutan has proposed another concept called Human Happiness Index. Not just enough to be rich, you should be happy. So ultimately, happiness. Bill Gates is the richest man, but their family is not happy because he has to divorce his wife at this age. I'm sure a poor man who lives a happy life with his wife is certainly much better compared to Bill Gates, at least in this sense. I'm not telling Bill Gates is, maybe Bill Gates may be happy with this, I don't know. But from my standpoint, that's not happiness. So he may be the richest man on earth, one of the richest men on earth. So it's called human happiness. So studies, there is a major argument that if women are at the helm of affairs, if the women are if the women's representation in politics increase, if more women are in parliament, if more women are in assembly, if more women are in government, there will be greater focus on social development or human development. Well, there can be women who think like men. There can be men who are as sympathetic as women. There can be exceptions on both sides. But largely studies reveal that women have a greater tendency to respond to issues of human development. Because they, in our societies, especially the child caregivers, so they are responsible for water, sanitation, health, hygiene at home. So obviously, women have a greater responsibility on these aspects of development. Well, these are the two arguments in defense of higher representation of women in politics. So democracy will be more representative, more women are in politics. There will be greater emphasis on social development or human development. Still, why only 14.4% of members of parliament are women? So what are the reasons for that? Why is this situation still remains in our country? Well, if you ask political parties, they often state that winnability is a criteria for choosing candidates in elections. Winnability means the ability of the candidate to win the elections. After all, political parties are in elections, contest elections to win. So the argument of the political parties is that women are less winnable. If we choose the men may win, the winning chances of men are high. But if this is true, then why are political parties not fielding more women to upper houses? Upper house essentially mean Rajya Sabha in parliament and legislative council at the state level. Well, in upper houses, the candidates, if nominated by a political party, automatically wins. There is no problem of winnability. Because Rajya Sabha members are elected by members of assembly. So if the political party has strength, automatically, whomever they feel, they can get elected. If YSR Congress feel men or women, they'll automatically get elected. So then, if the winnability is the only factor that impedes women's equal representation in parliament, then there should be more women elected to Rajya Sabha, where the winnability criteria doesn't really matter. But what is the representation of women in Rajya Sabha? It is less. It is even less, only 10%. At least in parliament, in Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha together constitute parliament. In Lok Sabha, at least there is 14.4%. In Rajya Sabha, it is only 10%. Well, in the legislative councils also it is much less. So therefore, the winnability argument is a flawed argument, only to defend the patriarchal assumption. Then, are really women not winnable? You will be surprised to know, since 1952 till 2021, if you look at the 7 decades of elections to parliament and even state assembly, the share of women winners among the contestants, or the success rate of women is always higher than men. So success rate of women is always greater than success rate of men. So therefore, the empirical evidence also proves otherwise. So then the winnability factor doesn't come into the picture. So it's only the problem of political parties. They are not willing to field more women in Lok Sabha, in election, in assembly elections. There is, of course, variation among states. And there is also a variation among political parties. Trinamool Congress leads in fielding more women candidates, is around 22%. Well, in 2019, BJP and Congress have fielded around 12% candidates, women candidates. So there's a variation from party to party, from state to state also. Certain states have a reasonably higher representation, and whereas certain other states do not have. So, but still the picture is grim if you look at the entire country. So therefore, what is the reason for that? Well, there are several arguments against the women's reservations. The first argument is, why should women get quotas? Why can't they fight? Reservations are undermining the self-respect of women. But the reality is, normally there shouldn't be reservations. They should have a natural growth. It should be an evolutionary process. Unfortunately, we have taken 7 decades to move from 24 to 78. From 78 to 181, if we say 1/3, how many more decades will take? Perhaps we'll take another 7 decades. So should we wait 7 more decades to have a legitimate representation for women? Then that is another question. Though reservations may not be a right or appropriate method of ensuring equality, certainly not. But when the system fails to realize it, then the affirmative action in the form of reserving 1/3 seats may perhaps be the option. Though I'm not telling that things will totally change just because if more women come into parliament. But then what is the solution? To make democracy reasonably representative. We have waited for 7 decades, nothing happened. Then there is another question, another big argument. What will happen if certain seats are reserved for women? Ultimately, who will contest? The close relatives of influential politicians will contest. It is called Didi, Bibi, Beti syndrome. So wife, daughter, or sister of an influential politician, daughter-in-law, will contest. Well, my question is, if a son is replaced by a daughter, still it is democratic. So even that, to that extent, it is democratic. But how do we answer to this question? We have seen several instances where women are really elected, but the men dominate. I went to a place recently, 2 days back. Someone was introduced to me as a Mandal president. I was shocked, I was surprised to learn later that his wife is the Mandal president. But everybody is introducing the husband as Mandal president. And I first became MLC. I went for a protocol meetings. There used to be announcement. Now our Sarpanch so-and-so comes, I request him to come to the dais. Request. So the announcement is of the woman Sarpanch. But the man comes to the dais. What is this announcement? The name sounds like a woman. But why this man is coming? Then they told me that his wife is the Sarpanch, but he is a man who enjoys the power. We have seen the case of Rabri Devi. When Lalu Prasad Yadav was jailed, Rabri Devi became the chief minister. So bad. How do we answer this question? Even if you reserve 1/3 seats for women, ultimately the normal woman, the ordinary woman, will never get a chance. The women members of influential political families will get elected. Well, it is true. Nobody can deny that. Nobody can deny that. In a country where politics of inheritance are so strong, nobody can deny the fact that the family members of influential political families will exploit the facility. Well, but democracy will not always be like that. I'll give you an example. When immediately after independence, when certain seats in Lok Sabha and state legislatures were reserved for scheduled caste or scheduled tribes, what really happened? So the Jamindars, Jagirdars, the rich and powerful, they have fielded their henchmen, those who are very loyal to them in these seats, and they wielded power indirectly. But things have changed over a period of time. Today, that is not the situation. Today, there is independent leadership for the Dalits and tribals of this country. So even if we start reserving seats for women, at the beginning, there may be members of influential families exploiting the facility, but over a period of time, independent women leaders will emerge. And this situation is already evident. If you look at the women politicians in India, all women politicians are not alike. We have leaders like Sonia Gandhi, Indira Gandhi, who entered politics especially due to the family background. But over a period of time, they have become influential in their own stride. When Indira Gandhi, when she joined politics, perhaps she might have been referred to as Nehru's daughter. But is that the case today? Is still Indira Gandhi considered only as Nehru's daughter? She has a role in the contemporary Indian polity, which someone may agree with her or disagree with her, but you can't ignore her. Indira Gandhi was one of the strongest leaders of India. Sonia Gandhi, when she joined politics, she went to join as a widow of Rajiv Gandhi. But that's not the case today. She has her own standing in politics. Well, this is the first type, this is one type of it. Then there are political leaders whose husbands may also be in politics, but their political life is not necessarily because of their husbands. Look at Sushma Swaraj. Well, her husband was also in politics, but she has not become a political leader because of her husband. We have CPIM leader Brunda Karat. Her husband is also a political leader, but she has not attained the political leadership because of her husband. So this is the second type of women leaders. I'll tell you the third type of women leaders. Leaders like Mamata Banerjee, leaders like Uma Bharati, who have absolutely no family background. Mamata Banerjee famously said, I don't even have a family. Where is the question of family background? So, but she became the strongest leader, getting elected third time, defeating the formidable left front, which was in power for 34 years. And Mamata Banerjee today is a contender for the highest post in the country, Prime Minister. She has no family background. Like that, we have several women leaders who have absolutely no family antecedents, but still become influential leaders in politics. So therefore, the Didi Bibi Beti syndrome cannot be cited to deny the women the legitimate share in political power, in political space. So then there is another question. So what should be the alternative to this? I gave you several arguments that are often cited to deny women Then there is another question also. Are there sufficient women leaders? If you suddenly allocate one-third of seats to women, do we really have sufficient leaders? This is absolutely ridiculous argument because we have been reserving 50% seats in local bodies for women for quite some time. Every time 1 million women are elected to local bodies, from ward member to sarpanch to MPTC, ZPTC, municipal chairperson, lakhs of women are elected. I don't exactly have the number. And it is very difficult to work as a sarpanch than MLA for a woman. At least people will accept women MLA, but very difficult for people to accept women sarpanch. So therefore, the logic of inadequate leadership is illogical. The argument that there is no adequate women leadership is erroneous. It is illogical, irrational, and it is not substantiated by empirical base. So it's only an argument which is for the sake of argument. So there can be many such arguments opposing women's reservations or women's adequate participation in institutions of parliament and state legislature. Well, then what are the alternatives? So one of the argument is that one of the strongest argument against the present bill is that if 1/3 of the seats are reserved for women, it is only the upper caste and upper class women will benefit. The OBCs will lose. So this is the one reason cited by political parties like RJD, JDU, to oppose Samajwadi Party, to oppose the women's reservation bill. Their argument is that if 181 seats in the House of 543 are reserved for women, it is the upper caste and upper class women will win, denying the OBCs their adequate share in Lok Sabha. Well, my argument is quite simple. In the post-Mandal phase, there are more OBCs elected to the parliament and assembly. Prime Minister himself comes from an OBC background. So there are around 120 OBC MPs today in the present Lok Sabha. It is over 22% or around 23%. I accept the fact that it is much less compared to the share, as I told at the beginning. The share in the population as estimated by the Mandal Commission is 52%. So this is not even off. But my point is, then why the so-called political parties like FP, RJD or JDU are not asking for reservation for OBCs in general, like SCs and STs. So we have reservation for STs in Lok Sabha and Assembly. Automatically 1/3 of those reserved seats will go for women. These so-called political parties which claim to represent OBCs are not asking for OBC reservation, but they are asking for quota only in the women's quota, which shows something seriously wrong with their argument. So their argument, and another important point is, if we allow this women's reservation bill to be passed, and if the experience suggests that OBC women are at disadvantage, I'm sure we can always amend the bill. And I don't think any political party will even oppose that. But for the last 25 years, in the name of OBC justice, the women's justice is being stalled. So this only reflects the patriarchy in these leadership, in these political parties. So to conclude, what are the alternatives? A popular alternative which is suggested is instead of amending the constitution to reserve one-third of the seats to women, let us make changes in the People's Representation Act and mandate that every political party should field at least one-third women candidates. This is the easy way. The political party will have freedom. They can field women candidates from anywhere they like, instead of reserving certain seats for women. Well, it sounds quite interesting. Sounds quite pragmatic also. But the problem with that is political parties are so wicked. They know which seats they are going to lose and which seat they are going to win. So what will they do? They will field women candidates in the losing seats to arrive at numbers. Suppose, assuming that Bharatiya Janata Party has to field 181 out of 543 candidates, women candidates, what will they do? They field men in Uttar Pradesh and field women in Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, where they have no winnable chances of winning. Ultimately, it will be 181. Similarly, if the left doesn't field sufficient women candidates in Kerala, but fields all candidates in Uttar Pradesh, women candidates, the percentages will suffice. But will it have any benefit? So for that, there is yet another suggestion. So we can make it like this. Every political party should field at least one-third women candidates in every state, if it is Lok Sabha elections, and every district, if it is assembly elections. So that this will minimize the possible misuse of the provision by the political parties. The misuse I already explained. Well, to an extent, this sounds pragmatic. So, but even political parties are not agreed to this proposal also. There is another proposal. Increase the number of seats in parliament by one-third and allocate them for women. Well, anybody who has simple knowledge of arithmetic will tell you that in such a situation, in such an eventuality, it will not be one-third, it will be one-fourth only. That's a simple mathematics. If we increase seats by one-third and reserve them for women, it will be one-fourth only. And why should the parliament have more members? Only to give representation for women. And there is another suggestion. We will have one-third of the seats as dual candidate. There will be two candidates, one general, one woman. What will happen? The woman member will only be an ornamental member. The real power will be enjoyed by the male member. So all such alternatives do not really achieve the purpose of political empowerment of women. So therefore, the demand to reserve one-third seats in Lok Sabha and state legislature. If you don't reserve, at least you mandate political parties to field as many women candidates as possible, so that you'll have a greater representation for women in parliamentary institutions, so that they become truly representative of Indian society. But it's still a long walk to political empowerment of women.